Okay, the recording is in progress. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, which is the second from the title Preserving Disability, Disability and the Archival Profession. This is the second of two with a different slate of contributing authors, which is fantastic. If you haven't seen the first one, it is currently on the Library Juice YouTube channel. I'm going to briefly say just a little bit about Library Juice before I hand it over to the editors and the authors today. We publish books that examine theoretical and practical issues in librarianship for an audience of practicing professional librarians and students. We're an imprint of Litwin Books, so you can find more about us over on litwinbooks.com. You can also find us on all the platforms, including Mastodon, Instagram, Facebook, and Blue Sky, where we're all having a nice time. We have a number of upcoming book launch events, which y'all may be interested in. March 11th and March 13th is going to be Music Information Literacy, Inclusion and Advocacy. Just like with this title, we're going to have two events because we have so many contributing authors. And then on March 12th, we'll be hearing from the folks behind Building Our Own, Critiques, Narratives, and Practices by Community College Library Workers of Color. And then March 19th and 20th, we'll be hearing about Censorship is a Drag, LGBTQ plus materials and programming under siege in libraries. But now I'm so excited, Gracen and Lydia, to pass it over to the two of you to hear more about your exciting book.
Thank you, Sophie. We first just like to thank Sophie and the team at Library Juice Press for all of their support in making this book happen and these events happen. Thank you for the technical support as well as we navigate these events together. For folks who want captions, captions should be enabled if you hit the Show Captions button at the bottom of your screen. I'm Gracen Brilmyer. I'm one of the co-editors of the book, and I'd like to just start us off by thinking about place, space, and history, and by acknowledging the storytellers and caretakers of the land that I'm on today. I'm on the traditional territory of the Ganyangayaga, the traditional custodians of these lands and waters, Jajage, past, present, and emerging. I want to invite you all to think about the land that you're on today and your relationship to place, space, culture, land, history. Invite you to take a look at native-land.ca, which I cannot put in the chat for some reason, and invite folks who are here with us today to say hello in the chat and where you're coming from. It's always nice to feel the community at these events, especially in a webinar where we can't all see each other. So I will toss it over to Lydia to start us off.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Lydia Tang, just to get us started, we wanted to introduce each other to you all as a way to kind of talk about how the seeds of this project came to be. And so I'm introducing Gracen, and so we'll just get started by saying that both of us had very nonlinear paths to where we are. Gracen has a background in art and has worked for a decade in museums with insect collections, but has been involved with accessibility work in museums, spaces, and in science education. Gracen earned their master's at the UC Berkeley, working on front-end development and digital accessibility from design interface to disability activism. And they earned their PhD from UCLA, working with Michelle Caswell, who is the editor of this overarching series with Litwin Press, and became very involved with community archives research and the impact of archives, which shaped their own research on the intersection of disability studies and archives. Gracen is the director of the Disability Archives Lab at McGill University, which is a hub for collaborative projects by and for disabled people. and is working on a new Mellon-funded project on community archives and marginalized memory work, establishing and funding an internship program for students to learn and work in local community archives. So part of a collaborative project across 9 universities who are all running their community archives internship programs. And one thing that I greatly valued among so many things collaborating with Gracen was the poetic, thoughtful, and insightful work on Gracen's work, lifting the voices and perspectives of disabled archivists and researchers working with archival collections.
Thank you, Lydia. Yeah, and I am really excited to introduce Lydia to you all. And yeah, really grateful for this collaboration and making this book happen. Lydia brings a background in classical music and then fell into working in archives as a starving musician. And has over a decade of experience working in academic archives. She also has just been so instrumental in a lot of practices and frameworks and ways of doing archives that center disabled people and accessibility. She was involved with the enormous task of updating the guidelines for accessible archives for people with disabilities. Also the Archivists at Home document, which I think was a real game changer for archivists to share resources and strategies and knowledge around accommodation throughout the pandemic. And just was like a wildly collaborative endeavor amongst many of the people here to support archivists and advocating for themselves and for each other for better accessibility. Lydia was a founding member of the Society for American Archivists Accessibility and Disability section, which was just like a whole lot of work in making this whole constellation of practice on accessibility and disability come together, but really has just like spurred this new community of knowledge around these topics. A mentorship program for early career disabled archivists and students, which I was a mentor for 1 year, as well as directly started the seeds for this book. She has an immense amount of experience with sharing her knowledge too in presentations and keynotes and teaching on accessibility and disability. She's absolutely come to one of my classes at McGill. And shared her deep knowledge about accessibility advocacy and even the like technical back-end aspects of advancing open source technologies like archive space that she's working with at Lyrasis. Yeah, and I'm really grateful for the breadth of practice-based knowledge that she has brought to this book and to our collaboration, having worked as an archivist at the Library of Congress and at Michigan State University, but also in these archival technologies where she's really thinking about supporting archivists in providing access to information and organizing information and training archivists in such work. So yeah, I think this collaboration really was a great pleasure because of our very, very different backgrounds and coming together to think about this intersection.
So we wanted to also do a little bit of discussion about how this collaboration process happened with the book, and then we'll move forward with allowing the authors to speak about their chapters as well, of course. So we wanted to share some comments about how we made this book. And so what I'd say is that this book was a collaborative whirlwind from the very beginning. So spinning off from this germination of the Society for American Archivists Accessibility and Disability section, many of us collaborated with each other for many different projects. And so this book is just a natural extension of the work that many of us have done together over the years. And we used Airtable for organizing the submission workflows. And so with over 20 chapters, it really was quite an ambitious project to keep track of everything and to track its progress, and was a huge community effort, including volunteers, both authors and additional supporters who helped with the peer review process, as we all collectively worked to make our chapters as strong as they could be together. And I relied on Gracen's expansive expertise of the literature. I would say I'm not a particularly bookish person. I barely have time to read or to write. I get kind of personally a little bit too shy to write a lot of things. But it was really great to work with Gracen's expansive knowledge of the literature. And I would say that Gracen had to put up with me sometimes being quite stubborn as I tried to adapt the phrasing of our introduction in a very musical kind of way. So I had to have some phrases be the way it was. So some thumb wrestling happened, and I think it was stronger because of it. And we were also so thrilled with Gracen's connection and ongoing collaborations with the great disability activist Alice Wong, that Alice was willing to write a foreword for this book. So we are so happy that it all came together.
Yeah, definitely some wrestling that made this book worth it. So in thinking about language, and just to kick us off, I thought I love reading out loud, but I thought I would just read a little bit of our musings on the title of the book, on preserving disability. Our introduction is freely available on Litwin's website. And I'm just going to start on the first page and just read a couple paragraphs. Preservation is entangled with many values. In an archival sense, appraisal, or the ways archivists select what to preserve and keep for future use, offers central questions to the profession. What materials are determined to have value for future users? What responsibilities come with selecting what to acquire and assessing capacity to process, to store it? And how might archivists reassess what to continue storing, caring for, and preserving for the future? Inseparable from these questions are concerns around time, money, physical and digital storage, materiality, expertise, as well as access and use in the present and the future. For disabled people, the concept of preservation can come with complicated connotations. We are often taught about our own elimination through eugenics logics of survival of the fittest, or rehabilitation practices that normalize us into productive citizens, instilling beliefs that disability should be eliminated or at least avoided at all cost. We often face our own exclusion or assumptions that our lives shouldn't be preserved through ableism, inaccessibility, institutionalization, as well as laws and barriers that keep us out of public places. And we see how that is reflected in some histories documenting disability, which can lack our own voices, agency, or us altogether. Yet disabled people have long resisted assumptions showing the politics, community, resistance, and joy in being disabled. Mia Mingus tells us it means something to be disabled. Never forget that. Rosemary Garland Thompson pushes back against eugenic assumptions and instead makes a case for conserving disability, highlighting the contributions to our world from disabled people as they are. Disabled, sick, mad, chronically ill, blind, deaf, and neurodivergent people know the magic that we bring to the world, the ways we perceive, navigate, build, care, and collaborate that is worth keeping for the future. Preserving disability, disability in the archival profession, mediates on the concept of preservation expansively for archives and disability, whether thinking about how it manifests in archival decision-making, such as appraisal, or in disabled lives and the systems that support or suppress them. This book begins with the assumption that disability is something worth preserving. First, it attempts to preserve disability quite literally, as this anthology documents disabled people's perspectives and experiences of the archival profession. This book weaves together first-person narratives and case studies contributed predominantly from disabled archivists and disabled archives users, bringing critical perspectives and approaches to archives. Chapters span topics such as accessibility of archives and first-person experiences of researching disability collections for disabled archives users, disclosure and accommodations and self-advocacy of disabled archivists, and processing and stewarding disability-related collections. We mark this present moment in the archival field as it intersects with disability for workers, users, and the materials they encounter, and show how archives shape and are shaped by disabled people. So with that, in this second iteration of our book launch and celebration of this big, heavy book, we're very excited to introduce this set of authors who address the archival profession through job advertisements, employment, archival work, and community. So yeah, each of our presenters, Chris, Iris, Zachary, and Veronica, will talk for about 5 minutes each about their respective chapters, and then we will open it up for questions from the audience. You're welcome to put your questions in the Q&A, or you're welcome to put them in the chat. So we will start with Chris, if you want to take it away.
All right. See if I can share for a moment. All right, so the chapter I worked on was Are You the Gatekeeper? Job Advertisements as Barriers to Employment for Disabled Archivists. And can everyone just see the slide? Great. So quickly, hi, I'm Chris. I have invisible disabilities. I was just one of the co-authors of this chapter. I want to highlight the wonderful work of my frequent collaborator, Ann Abney, who is Digital Initiatives Metadata Librarian at the University of South Florida. Kind of one of the things that inspired us in doing this was the idea that it's likely, and this quote is from David M. Perry. It was printed in Al Jazeera America. It's likely companies and universities would be happy to accommodate disabled employees, but their hiring processes close that door. I'm going to pause for a second, and I'm just going to read the intro to our chapter. So I think it really addresses the issue at hand. So in 1962, Emily Calhoun Wilson asked libraries, what categories of physically handicapped persons would you consider employing as professional librarians? 8% of all respondents to her survey said that they wouldn't consider hiring people with disabilities at all, and 2 respondents said that they had policies specifically against it. Today, such policies wouldn't be legal in many places. Still, archivists with disabilities are less likely to feel included in the profession and, in fact, take longer to find employment successfully. Although a quarter of American adults have a disability, barriers to employment still create systematic inequalities in the profession. Physician advertisements present the first barrier to applicants with disabilities. Ads may be littered with ableist language and requirements, whether or not the physical requirements are a necessary function of the position. These exclusionary requirements often get included in advertisement language to forestall disability lawsuits by including any physical activity that may be involved in the course of working. Academic institutions include boilerplate language for physical requirements despite not seeming relevant to the posted job. Lifting and moving boxes, pushing carts, and climbing ladders are all standard job announcement requirements for archivists. When crafting archivist positions, the ubiquity of the 40-pound box lifting requirement is often unquestioned. Ableist requirements are not limited to moving boxes. They include everything from requiring driver's licenses to tolerating ambiguity and having a positive attitude. The all too frequent requirements that reflect disposition, such as doesn't bring their own personal little black clouds into the work environment, may imply people with depression need not apply. People with disabilities may be deterred from applying for jobs with ableist requirements, particularly when their disability interacts with another marginalized identity. Research shows that women and racial minorities tend to believe they must meet every qualification in an advertisement. Ableist requirements in the form of personality traits can also make it harder for some candidates to feel qualified. Lopez calls out this tendency to require these traits as a dysfunctional recruitment practice of libraries akin to hiring for fit. So basically in the chapter, which was inspired by the some initial feedback for the book proposal that discussed the importance of the 40-pound box requirement, I decided to see just how much these requirements were actually in job postings. And so Anne and I undertook a study where we reviewed over 500 job advertisement posted to archives listservs over the course of many years. We took a sample. And just to sum it up, what we found was like 64% of the ads we looked at had some sort of communication requirements. Lifting was only in 28% of ads, which was a little surprising and kind of proves that you don't need them. 8% required driver's licenses, and a few had auditory or visual requirements. And just to note, like anytime you include these requirements in a job posting, you may be excluding individuals from your potential applicant pool. So that's kind of a brief overview. Just wanted to thank you and some credits for the slides and icons.
Thank you so much, Chris. That chapter is, definitely not an easy undertaking of reviewing all of those job advertisements, and really lays a foundation for thinking about the archival field. Now we'll hand it over to Iris to talk about their chapter.
Hi, everyone. I'm Iris Afantchao, and I was inspired to write this chapter because for many reasons, but I spent 4 years collectively between being a student and being staff, working at Smith College Special Collections, and my journey in understanding my own disabilities was really pivotal in that process, and how I've come to appreciate all that archives are capable of, not just as someone who researches in the archives, but as someone who really likes to be on the reference desk and help people of all backgrounds find access to materials, as well as helping to teach with primary sources, and sometimes being like that first point of contact for people who are learning how to do research on their own for the first time. For me, it all kind of came to a head because my final semester was when we went into lockdown for COVID-19. And that I like to say that I wouldn't have even finished school probably if we didn't all have to kind of slow things down. And I was really inspired by just the ways that public health and disability came up in the archives I was working with. So when the opportunity came to work with the community health organizers on campus at Smith, so they could look through the archives and find new ways to communicate with each other, especially knowing that there are health concerns on campus that they may be able to give advice for, but maybe not through like an official statement as part of the college. How were Black women, particularly in the National Black Women's Health Project, communicating those things in a really holistic way? I wanted to read a little bit from my chapter. I'll just read a little bit from the end here and see. Okay. Okay. Small successes such as these help me to imagine what my communities are capable of and what I can do beyond obtaining my degree or finding the best ways to gain experience in my topics of interest while always getting paid and always having benefits. The many unpaid LIS internships out there were never a possibility for me. As we continue to discover the lasting effects of COVID, we need to consider new ways to sustain disabled LIS workers, or else understaffed libraries will keep feeling the pressure. Continuing to unlearn laziness and productivity as individuals and organizations is a crucial part of this. If nothing else, I hope that each person who comes across this essay is able to reach into their own memories and journeys, not with an urgent sense of legacy making, but guided by the fact that we will seek each other out through space and time, whether our stories are preserved by us or not. How do we meet ourselves where we are and gain an archival interoception? Those senses beyond the classic five are expected to drive self-awareness, to guide our attention with our internal state of being. It can be difficult to connect with. My life with ADHD and chronic pain often includes not realizing hunger or other physical stressors easily. Even emotions can be difficult to distinguish right away. ARFID was never included in health class when we learned about disordered eating. To follow my gut takes training now, in many ways. As this pandemic morphs and state violence takes on more absurd forms, I freeze instead of leaning on fight or flight, while all of me tries to contextualize and find a way out. In the same way I'm suddenly overcome by the pains I usually tune out to function as a working class person, I am overwhelmed by the amount of grief I hold within me. I notice I haven't been breathing. Capitalism and ableism make self-preservation difficult to maintain physically, mentally, and in the archival sense. When weighed down like this, many of us witness public history without seeing ourselves. We can lose that instinct to record and archive our lived experiences, especially as disability hides within the archives. To feel ourselves within a larger history that doesn't hold us requires an awareness of our significance and inherent value. This includes being okay with recording our thoughts and feelings without needing them to be final and perfect. With this, I leave you with the invitation to find what grounds you in your story, however that may appear. So that's just a brief little bit from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Iris. Yeah, your chapter is so beautiful and so powerful around ideas of care and community and storytelling. So thank you. And I will hand it over to Zachary to talk about his chapter.
Thank you, Gracen. My name is Zachary Tumlin, and I am a project archivist at Duke University. And I see some of my coworkers in the chat, so I wanted to specifically thank them for being here today. But my chapter was co-written with David Spriegel, and it's based on 2 Archival Outlook articles, Toward Inclusion, Best Practices for Hiring People with Disabilities, which was published in 2020, and Supporting the Retention and Advancement of Archivists with Disabilities, which was published in 2021. The following SAA, Accessibility and Disability section members contributed to and or edited these articles: Jessica Chappell, Allison Clemens, Veronica Denison, Michelle Gons, Tressa Graves, Bridget Malley, Lindy Smith, Lydia Tang, Chris Tanguay, Lauren White, and the late Sarah White. Some of these people went on to author other chapters in this book, or in Lydia's case, become a co-editor and are joining us today. My goal with this chapter was to bring together and expand upon these two articles, given a higher word count, and because the third article was in the planning stages before this call for proposals, and place them in the context of a larger work on related topics rather than individual articles within the magazine issues. Toward inclusion, the following topics were covered: job postings, candidate evaluations, interviews, which include virtual, in-person, and the meal portion that sometimes happens, and then a job offer. In supporting the retention and advancement of archivists with disabilities, disclosure was the first topic. Then there were accommodations, which includes hearing, vision, mobility, and fine motor skills, and neurodivergence. The workplace environment, as well as workplace protections, supervisors and employee evaluations, and finally, promotions and advancement. Something that was not covered as much, but has come up more recently in a request for a webinar that I received, was managing while disabled, or in this case, specifically neurodivergent. And so that was an interesting request, I think, that I'm going to have to think more on. And I'm imagining how we might see more of that as, like, those of us here get older and hopefully, or maybe some of us take on like more management or leadership positions where that becomes something that we are thinking about more often. I'll mention that my co-author, David, contributed a personal narrative, which was not in either of the magazine articles. This was called Examples of Employment Impediments and Solutions for Disabled Archivists. And he did this to show how the implementation of these guidelines would have benefited him. So the broad goal of this chapter was to give a set of guidelines that you could implement, and then David showed how those had not been implemented in previous positions, but how they would have benefited him if they were.
Thank you, Zachary. Yeah, the chapter, brings together and aggregates points in the previous works. And yeah, I really love David's like interspersing narrative to them, as well as like this exhaustive list of how to better support disabled people. So thank you. And last but not least, Veronica.
Hi, everyone. My name is Veronica, and along with Gracen and Tara Brar, we wrote the chapter, Once I Show Up, They're Not Going to Hire Me, Job Searches, Interviewing, and Disclosure for Disabled Archivists. I want to just do like a brief overview of the research that Gracen and I did. So it actually came out of a 2020 Society of American Archivists conference session that I did with Chris Tanguay, who's here, Ann Abney, and Michelle Gans, called Archivists with Disabilities. Gracen contacted me after that, and we started this Labor of Belonging research project where we wanted to interview and talk to archivists with disabilities to investigate ways that they navigate the archival fields and archival labor. I will say this, I think also with Gracen was more also a personal project for us. And my like experience with being disabled kind of happened in 2016 with an acquired disability. And at the time, I felt the profession was very isolating and unaccommodating. And talking to the people that we interviewed for our research project, I found I was not alone. So that's really nice and also really sad. So I also want to acknowledge our participants and their vulnerability for sharing their experiences with us. Without them, this work would not have happened. So I want to thank them for being willing to do that. And I just want to give like a nice little overview of our chapter. So for the chapter, we used firsthand accounts that were collected through interviews with 12 disabled archivists located in the United States and Canada. And we took a critical look at the difficulties of disclosure prior to and during the interview process for disabled people working in the archival field. We described how the inclusion of physical requirements in job postings impacts people with disabilities and how these requirements serve as a barrier to people applying for jobs in the archival profession. We found that interviewees described the limitations of those requirements, while some make the decision not to apply for those specific positions that do have those requirements. We also discussed the complexity of disclosure when applying for jobs, as well as the impact and stress this has on disabled archivists. On top of the stress already applying for jobs has. Those with more apparent disabilities tended to preemptively address their disability to limit any potential awkwardness, but they also tend to perform and become more dynamic in their actions and movements so that they can prove that they can do the job. One participant said, "They gave me the interview, so I'm in there for a reason, but now I make it a point of saying, I have upper arm strength, I have mobility, I can do this." Preparing for these interviews caused a lot of stress and anxiety when expressed how they even look for images of the building that they're going to be interviewing in before they go there because they're worried about navigating. Other participants expressed fear about disclosing because they've been too scared, which is compounded by job precarity. And I want to give a shout out to Chris and Ann's chapter that I think some of their data found that more term positions tend to have more physical requirements. So if we want to think about that with newer archivists coming into the profession and how that barrier, there's more of an even barrier to access to the field for people who are coming out of grad school and people that are in more precarious positions. Other people that we interviewed said that they wouldn't apply for a position unless they know of someone who can vouch for the workplace. And finally, we discussed ways that institutions and hiring managers can make job interviews more inclusive, as expressed by our participants. So thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. Yeah, another lovely collaboration. And yeah, really, really been a beautiful experience to collaborate with you and all the other folks who kind of came into that project, the folks we interviewed and our other co-authors. We have a recently published piece of the in the winter that just came out using the same data. We've written 3 pieces, the chapter of that Veronica just introduced. This one that is on professionalism and surprise, it's ableist. You can find the free PDF of that article on the Disability Archives Lab Linktree. And then today we are resubmitting our last little edits for our 3rd piece, which is on navigating accessibility, all from the same 12 interviews. So really excited to share these really powerful words with the world. So now we will open it up for questions. As I said before, folks are welcome to ask questions in the chat or in the Q&A, which you can ask anonymously. And yeah, I just want to thank all of our contributors for sharing and kind of getting us started thinking about all of the many connections between your words and your ideas. And yeah, Lydia and I prepared some questions to start us off as folks in the audience think about questions that they might have. And panelists, you are welcome to ask questions of each other too. But yeah, many of your chapters address assessing the field in job advertisements and employment and thinking about connections to community and care. So yeah, I would love to hear if some of you or all of you want to speak about your methods a little bit, about your like approaches to looking at the archival profession, because there's so many different approaches to assessing the profession as it is.
I'm happy to kind of start off here. I really wanted to take a kind of quantitative look at it because, so much otherwise is very subjective. And even some of the things we were assessing, like we were looking for ableist language red flags, which is good subjective, but we were able to like look at things and say like, okay, well, this definitely has a lifting requirement. This definitely has this or that. And we actually based some of our methodology off of work that had been done by, I'm blanking on her name. Tanzi, doing work on looking at archival job listings. But that was more for like entry-level positions. So this is a very different look at things. And I was just thinking the other day too that it probably would be a good thing to go back and relook at new postings to see like how things have changed. Because I think initially we wanted to do more of a look at how things changed over time, but there was just so much data. We didn't get that granular about it.
I guess for me, I can naturally be a fixer. And so that may be one reason I was drawn to guidelines originally with the articles and then this chapter. So offering things that people can do to make things better.
For myself, I was inspired to take a more, I don't know, I guess like memoir, autoethnographic approach, partly because of my colleagues at UMass Amherst, Isabel Espinal and Maria Rios, their chapter for knowledge justice, disrupting library and information studies through critical race theory. I was aware of like the gap in literature talking about experiences of people who may have like fellowships that are at a post-baccalaureate level rather than like a residency librarianship level. And just thinking about the opportunities and ways to evaluate the field by having more opportunities at that level, because it's a big commitment to not have very much LIS work under your belt or archives work or memory work, and then have to decide if you're going to go into a master's program, especially when you're already disenfranchised in other ways, including economically. So that was, plus just getting the jitters out for deciding to write something and publish something in the field for the first time. So I really appreciate y'all as editors making that process gentle. So thank you.
I think for Grace and I, it was really just talking to other disabled archivists just to see like what their experiences are, and what they have, what came up for them. And what we found is that it really didn't matter on the type of institution that they were working at, or their position or how long they were in the field. It really varied, but everyone had somewhat similar experiences as well. And I think just, we wanted to let people know that this is not uncommon in the profession with people with disabilities. And I think after the session that we did in 2020 for Society of American Archivists, there were a lot of people who had emailed Chris and Michelle and Anne and I saying like, I never thought about disclosing, or thank you for being open about your disability. And it's something that a lot of people in the profession never talked about because they would be afraid they would get a job. And it was something that I was worried about too. So I really think just giving a voice to people, just let people know that this is not uncommon, that there are a lot of disabled archivists out there, and there should not be a barrier to the profession for them.
Thank you all so much for your responses there. We have a question in the Q&A. So they say, hello, first off, thank you all so much for your time today. This book reminds me a lot of another amazing book in LIS, Knowledge Justice. We just heard about this book and how I believe both are so creative by the nature of their ways of revealing and reimagining the discipline. My question, I suppose, is what do you guys feel like the landscape looks like going forward in terms of spaces for collaboration that will spark even more creative and potentially centripetal research that can transform the discipline in new and intersectional ways?
So one of the first things that comes to mind is in the post-COVID world, there's so much ability to, I shouldn't say post-COVID, it's not really post-COVID, but the changes that have happened since the start of the pandemic, I think have given us more spaces to collaborate virtually, which I think is great. I know I've been thinking a lot about where to take the research further. And I think the one problem with the landscape is how do we do this work without burning out? And that's a concern. I feel like I've been really influenced by Katrina Davis Kendrick, who does a lot of work around toxic environments and that sort of situation. And I feel like with the potential for like budget cuts in different areas, that's going to be tricky. I will say that just to touch on knowledge justice, I used to work with Cecilia Young, who is one of the contributors to that. And I know she was a massive influence on how I think about things because she had a lot of really like good thoughts and ways of thinking about things. So highly recommend her work.
Okay, that chat is the question is still going to remain in the Q&A. We just had another one that came in. So if anybody thinks of any other additional answers that they'd like to provide for this first question, feel free to respond in writing to them as well. The other question that just recently came in is, I'd love to hear about your individual, and for those who co-authored, collaborative writing processes, including how you fit it into your workday / manage your spoons, and what technologies. Remember, a pencil is a tool too, just like word processing software, helped you throughout the creative process, including the time management aspect.
I can go, I guess. Grayson might have to refresh my memory a little bit too, because it was a long time ago. When we did the interviews, we used Zoom and the transcript feature. Um, I know I took notes, like personal notes with a pencil. While we talked to our participants to highlight to like have like highlights so that I could remember like who said what specifically. And then we we transcribed the audio through a service that I can't remember the name of, and then we coded it. So Grayson, myself, and Tara, who is the co-author, did coding. So like picking up common themes throughout all of the um, like audio, and then we kind of put them all together, like documents of themes and who said what. And then with the authoring, we've kind of split it. So with this chapter, I kind of took the lead on this one. Um, and then the other ones, Grayson kind of took the lead on. And at the time when we did this project, I had a different position where I could have time to do it during work hours, and it was respected that I could do this research during work hours. It's a little different where I am now. So a lot of my research work is done on the weekends or at night, unfortunately. So I've been going to coffee shops and typing and making notes. Um, and yeah, I think that answered the question. I don't know, Grayson. There's a lot of back and forth and track changes too.
Yeah, I feel like, yeah, even though each of us sort of took the lead on a different sort of group of themes that had emerged, yeah, we were still pretty frequently sending drafts back and forth and chatting about ideas. Yeah, but I have the privilege of having a job that, well, expects me to be publishing, so try hard to carve out time to write. And I will say I'm part of a number of writing groups, both with other disabled people as well as other academics. And I think those sustain me and keep me sitting in my chair and paying attention to write in ways that I would not be able to if I wasn't like in a Zoom room with other people. Yeah, so always love collaborative space and body doubling. Yeah. Does anybody else want to speak about their writing process?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I was just like going through my emails to remember when I saw the like call for chapter proposals. My friend sent it to me in July 2023. So at that time, I just stopped working at Smith. So I was on unemployment. So I was looking for something to do. So I had time to write. I was also in the middle of my master's program. I just got my I just finished my LIS program in December, so I'm happy that's done. But between the writing for that and just trying to figure out what I wanted to do next, I was just doing a lot of reflecting anyways. So it just turned from journaling and talking with friends to kind of like taking the highlights from those things or the recurring themes and trying to stream of consciousness, write a chapter, and then try and make it a little bit more organized from there. But yeah, I had plenty of time to think about it in between things.
I can speak a little bit about my collaboration. So I think Anne and I did a lot of work in Excel on Google Docs in terms of tracking our data. I pulled a lot of job ads in and spent a lot of time crunching that data. And we definitely divided up the sections. Like I spent a lot of time on the literature review. And it was like pretty, I don't know, complicated. I'm trying to remember exactly because it feels like so long ago that we wrote most of it. But I know I fortunately have some time written into my job description for professional development, so I was able to use that for writing the chapter. So I would highly recommend to people who are negotiating, if you can negotiate that time, that's great. I was fortunate that that was just written into the job description, so I didn't have to ask for it, but very helpful to have that. Yeah, I think that's about it.
So we have another question. I would be curious to hear some perspectives on the impact or lack thereof of adaptive technologies on archival work. Are developments in that field being reflected in archival work environments? Do folks have thoughts on that?
I think things are getting better in terms of making captions more readily available with all faults of AI generated captions. So we know that it can set a baseline with a lot of human intervention required to make it good. But it's so much better than the bad old days of a foot pedal, basically, and trying to slow it down and transcribe everything as best you can. So it's getting there and continuing to press the amount of labor that is required for the human intervention to make it actually polished is so important. I'm also thinking about that platforms and tools are also continuing to advance in their accessibility too. So the tools that we use as archivists, whether it's an archival collection management tool or a digital asset management tool, things like that, there are mandates that have been coming down from the executive level, and I hope that they don't get stripped away currently. But there is the ADA Title II that is coming into effect in this next year or so, that is going to require publicly funded institutions to create accessible digital content going forward. And so that awareness is pressing. And so it's pressing for the affected institutions, and it's also pressing down the line for the institutions that are creating these tools that so many institutions rely on to share out their content. And so it's an ongoing process of advancing accessibility from the technology lens to provide access to archives, especially in a digital realm, but the awareness is rising, and so is the skill for getting there.
Do other folks have thoughts or experiences with adaptive technologies at their work?
I think it might depend on what you consider adaptive technologies, like how high tech or low tech. And like if you mean like a processing environment within my workplace, I know I see a greater awareness or concern for ergonomics, for example. And so do you consider that adaptive technology or not? The prevalence of sit-stand desk and chairs that fit your body and are adjustable. So I'm thinking about just what do I see when I look around my workplace, things like that that seem like, you know, more recent or that supplement the kind of previous existing workplace that I can see was present in the past.
Or even like, sorry, Chris. I was just gonna say, just like even voice to text software, that I had to use a lot, and I wish I had now, where when I couldn't type, I wasn't able to type for a couple years, and so I was relying on voice to text software to describe collections and do metadata. And I really swear by that. And I think every institution should have that. It's just like sometimes it's just easier too. Like my hands are tied up and I just would like to use it so I don't have to type all the time. But yeah.
I will say that there has been some pushback in my workplace about certain chat transcription because it's recording meetings, which I have not dealt with directly, but I know other people have basically been told that they can't use it, which is troubling.
We've had that too recently, and I think it just has to do with what's going on politically. So, yeah.
So
Oh, sorry.
go ahead, Iris.
Yeah, I was just going to briefly say my current job is not particularly in the archives like department of my library, so I feel like a little bit removed. But I think about the ways that we try to just have technology that can keep up with adapting old formats and continuing to digitize them and trying not to lose like bits of either the actual information or like what you can learn from the physicality of those objects along the way, and how do we make up for those gaps if we do have to lose that. And I also, it brought to mind something right before I left Smith. They were trying to do transcripts for episodes of Dyke TV, which was like public access TV in New York City in the 90s. And it would always censor the word dyke, which comes up a lot in there. So, just thinking of the biases in the technology, and once again, just making sure that you are able to dedicate enough people actually looking through those things and adjusting them so that, you know, there are people who need captions and transcripts who also, are part of those communities, part of queer communities, and are trying to find those words. So if they disappear, how do you keep up and just make sure they're still present and still searchable, as well as like subject headings and all those things. So yeah, that's all. Thanks.
All right. And some additional questions have come in so far. And so another question is, how do you all feel about / think through the material cited in your footnotes in a book like this, especially regarding the accessibility of the individual sources and academic material as a whole, including financially, institutionally, language, etc.?
I know that there were things I wanted to cite that I couldn't find a way to shoehorn in because it didn't quite hit that. I don't think I thought so much about the accessibility of it because some of the materials I found, like I had like that thesis I quoted from the beginning of my chapter, that I had to get on interlibrary loan, and it was a Xerox of the thesis, and that took a while to find. And I know I requested a ton of things through ILB because we didn't have access to it. So, I mean, financially, if you don't have access to those sources, it is very difficult. So, yeah, it's tricky because like I tried to hit as many things as I could, and not gonna lie, I did use Sci-Hub a little bit to get some things, but tried to get them through more legitimate sources when I could.
That's something that came up a bit between Lydia and I when we were writing the introduction to, you know, in the intro, we try to sort of do a brief overview of like these different lineages of knowledge that have like led to where we are in this present moment about thinking about disability and the archival profession. And yeah, we do cite like open access articles, like the previous articles that were mentioned that Zachary's chapter draws on, an archival outlook, as well as like some like blog posts and things by disabled writers that are outside of academia. But then, yeah, I think, and in doing that, you know, I don't know, I don't want to speak for Lydia, but I felt like it was a big challenge to think through like disabled knowledges that are not published or are like harder to cite or find in the first place, as well as like all in the archival sense, thinking about all of the practice-based interventions that have been done, that again are not like academic articles. So yeah, it was definitely tricky, and we do acknowledge just like the giant the way we can only inadequately tell the story of the evolution of ideas, because yeah, we were relying primarily on things that we that have been published or that we could cite or that have some sort of internet location, but inevitably that's going to be like a very, 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 very incomplete history. So we try not to make any sweeping claims as like this is absolutely what happened, but these are the pieces that we're acknowledging as part of a greater and more complex history.
I feel like people tend to like skip over how money really moves in the whole like academic publishing industrial complex. I don't even know what to call it really. And just the fact that like a lot of the money from those journal paywalls doesn't like actually go to the authors. And I only learned through just being in college. Like sometimes you just got email the author and be like, can you just send me the PDF? And they will. So as far as my own chapter, I mostly, it was really serendipitous that Black Disability Politics, the book, has an open access version. And a lot of me writing this chapter came from just the experience, like I mentioned, of reading that open access version of the book while I was on the desk during my reading room shifts, and seeing those people research as I'm like thinking about what Dr. Schock's process of coming into Smith's archives like years earlier, there it is, thank you, Gracen, and looking through those same collections was, and kind of just like embodying that and reading at the same time. So I encourage everyone to read the online open access version. If you have Spotify, it's included in premium as an audiobook. But besides that, also just trying to integrate articles that I resonated with that were from like public sources. I have a couple academic things, but mostly just trying to find that balance. But yeah, that's a good question. Thank you.
All right, we have another question in the Q&A as a disabled, neurodivergent, and chronically ill LIS professional who has had to implement permanent and short-term ADA accommodations in my current workplace, which has been my only workplace as an early career worker, how have your disclosures, accommodations, writing, and, if relevant, descriptions of exclusionary workplace practices been received by colleagues and even supervisors?
I can start. It's so mixed. And it is so different depending on what it is. So I found that I can I can leave early to go to like a therapy appointment and work like a half day, right? That's they're fine with that. But like if it's, oh, maybe we should remove this exclusionary physical requirement stuff from a job posting. It's like, oh no, you can't do that. I've had department heads, accept the accommodations and be willing to like find ways, like buy me my ergonomic keyboard or pay for my transcription software, and acknowledge that I have lifting restrictions. But at the same time, that doesn't stop comments or that doesn't stop colleagues from commenting. So personally, I found that like this depends on who you work with and what their experience is of disability and what they think of disability. And like what disabilities are like, I hate to say this, like quote unquote, more acceptable than others. Because like at one level, like they acknowledge that like, oh, like, you might have a lifting restriction, but, they've also made some very ableist comments about other types of disabilities. So it's just like so unfortunately varied, in my experience. I don't know about anyone else.
Let's say that the people I work with most directly are really great about it. And then I've had to kind of, I spent a lot of time trying to actually get like a Fluxwork schedule set up because like they didn't want to fill out the paperwork. And more recently, I did have to go on like a lifting restriction for a couple of days, and like no one knew what to do about that. By the time Central HR got to me about it, I was like, "Yeah, my restriction's over." So it's tricky. Sometimes like the bigger parts of the machine don't always know how to deal with it or like want to deal with it.
I'd say, kind of going off of what Veronica was talking about, how some disabilities can have more stigma around them than others, unfortunately. And especially with some less apparent types of disabilities, there can be some situations where there's such ingrained ableism and there's such a disbelief that you don't look disabled. So like it can be a pervasive daily kind of interrogation and a disbelief about understanding disability and also accommodations in that way. So it can just be really challenging. And I'd say that from my own professional journey, transitioning into a fully remote archives adjacent role now, it has made things a lot easier. And I know that that's a privilege that very few people have, especially with more of the return to office kind of mandates that are happening.
As far as like response to, I guess, the chapter itself, I still have no idea. I guess I'm gonna find out over time. But my disabilities are one thing I mentioned in my chapter is geniculate neuralgia, otherwise known as nervous intermediate neuralgia, which is a pretty rare one. So like no one really knows what to think of that. And I remember one critique of from my new job in the past year for like the yearly review was like, oh, if you could update your calendar about if you're going to be working from home or like in the library a little bit earlier, that'd be great. But I'm also like, I don't know how I'm going to feel when I wake up. I don't know how I'm going to feel randomly in the middle of the day when I start getting like shocks to the brain. I like, there's no way to really make that earlier unless I wake up and am feeling good and I just know it's going to be fine, which who really knows? So thinking about that and just the continuing management of like, oh, how does long COVID continue to affect me and how do I still like show that I'm a social person while also not compromising the things that I need to like keep myself healthy, all things considered, especially at a college where sickness can spread so easily, not just among the students, but amongst faculty and staff. That continues to be a struggle. And just thinking about what kind of, I don't know, how I want to take my career moving forward. Thinking of like moving into like quote unquote professional LIS jobs versus the paraprofessional roles that I've had so far. Yeah, a lot to consider.
So I know that we are coming up on time pretty soon. So I have one last question, and unless some other ones come in. So this next question is, how do you think or hope that the ideas you explore in your chapters will shape the future of the profession? And what's next for you?
I guess my hope is that people will have more inclusive hiring practices and really rethink the requirements in job postings and rethink the interview process, because a lot of it is just so simple to do and reimagine that, we should get away from this structure. Like just because you've been doing things the same for 50 years in regards to interviewing practices doesn't mean we still have to do it. And so I really hope that people will look at that and recognize the impact that it has on people and that there is a barrier to access for people with disabilities into the profession. And it tends to affect newer graduates more, I think. And then I guess one thing with this research kind of led me down more of like a person-centered approach to archives, and looking at like the person and how archives impact people, and how the effects that like the stuff that we do every day impacts us. So I'm co-editing a book with Michelle Gans on like kind of like archival trauma and like the experiences that archivists have in that regard. So either it's like collections that we work with, or researchers that we work with, or donors and working with grieving donors, or just like trauma in general, and how that impacts archivists and how we approach it as like little case studies instead of like a be one end all, because none of us are like social workers or counselors or therapists. And there needs to be a lot more research in the field, I think, about trauma-informed practice within the archival profession. So anyways, we're still working on it. Hopefully it's going to be published in like a year, so just keep your eye out on that. But yeah, I'm really more interested in like, we have collections that we are responsible for, but we should also be responsible for ourselves and each other and our colleagues. Like the collections wouldn't be preserved if it wasn't for us, right? Like we are doing that kind of work, and we have to take care of ourselves too. So.
Yeah, I also hope that we will continue to see people pushing for changes with job ads, and I hope we do see changes in what those requirements are and people really think about what they are. One troubling thing I did hear was that like I heard someone talking about using AI to craft job ads, to which I say, no, do not do that. Because it just continues to, create those same old problems. And like, I just urge people to radically rethink, like, what do you actually need? What are your requirements? Because like, if you're really thinking about it every time you're posting a job, you're also like doing better by like your staff and the people around in the institution, because you're, filling those gaps that are needed and, really getting to the heart of what's necessary. And hopefully you're also making room for bringing in people who have less experience. In terms of things that are next, I am hopefully actually going to be developing a book with Michelle Gans, whose name just keeps coming up a lot today, and Abney on archival accessibility. But we will see what happens with that given the current political climate and if there will be enough interest in a book like that. But that's about it.
For myself, I'm hoping that, people take the time to really consider which communities their archives are a part of, whether they're actively creating outreach opportunities for them or not, and if not, why? And how can you make those things more accessible? How can we create non-traditional classroom experiences that don't rely so much, when possible, on how grueling the timeline of a semester or a school year can be, not just on students, but on staff. I also think about just finding a more holistic view of what disability is in general, and how that applies to you in your own life. For myself, I want to just continue writing, and I want to make the time to start doing a lot of the personal archival research that I've put off for the past couple of years, just trying to have a stable life and also finish grad school. And now grad school's done, so I have a little bit more time. So I'm excited to see where that takes me.
One of the things that I am doing at Duke is I'm involved with leading an affinity group focused on disability. And so thinking of taking some of these things out of library contexts and broader university and health system contexts, not just affecting change in the library or the library system, but across the whole university if possible.
I'd say for myself that it's been great to see the evolution of how much involvement is now happening around accessibility and disability. When I first started doing presentations about accessibility at SAA, it had been the first time in 7 years when there was a session beforehand. And so I'm so excited that there's a critical push now, and it's got sustaining momentum. And so for myself, at Lyrasis, I teach a Lyrasis learning course about accessibility in archives, and informally, as in I have one bullet point in my job description, but it's about advancing accessibility within the organization. And so I worked on the accessibility conformance reports for collection space, which is a museum collection management tool, and also DSpace. And I'm hoping to continue to get more involved with advancing accessibility in open source LIS software in the future.
Yeah, I'll just echo Lydia and just say, yeah, really, really excited for what comes out of this community of knowledge that's represented in the book. Really, yeah, grateful to have met so many new people and thinkers and writers through this project and through the immense amount of people who have been involved, peer reviewers, authors, collaborators, editors, designers, etc. Let alone, the participants in the research that Veronica and I did together. I think for me, one thing that's next is really thinking about taking these ideas and more into practice. I know that people who know me know that I've been working on this project for a while, and it's slowly coming to fruition with in collaboration with a couple of students at McGill who are in the audience, CJ Michael and Grace Isabor, where we had held focus groups with disabled people about how they want to be remembered in the future. And we're slowly analyzing those conversations to somehow distill some design principles for a post-custodial digital archive on disability. So really thinking about what do all of these ideas look like in practice if we can make something from scratch together. So slow going, but that is that is community-based work. So yeah. I think we were right on time for 4:30. So I guess, thank you again. Just an immense amount of gratitude for all of the panelists here who have not only put just so much work into their individual chapters, but for coming and sharing their perspectives and their wisdom with us today. And thank you again to Library Juice Press for helping us celebrate